I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, and welcome to the Alaska Weather Show on this Thursday, April 14th. And we're going to jump right into it because we have a little shorter time tonight because we're going to have the first River Watch segment of the river breakup season. That's going to follow right after the aviation weather. And we'll have from the River Forecast Center, Selena, who is the service hydrologist, give her expert assessment of how the early breakup season is expected to unfold. Now, we are also going to be watching a couple areas of low pressure. One, the main one, the next couple of days there and through the southeastern central quadrant of the Bering Sea. And another one may be working its way up through the lower Bering later on in the weekend. We are also right now experiencing a moderately strong geomagnetic storm that has been in progress during the daylight hours here in Alaska time. And if that disturbance can continue into this evening after dark, we may have an opportunity to view an enhanced display of the northern lights. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Cooling trend is anticipated from northern parts of the state down through the southeast, including the panhandle as we go through April 20th through the 24th, and we'll dive into that a little more with the 6 to 10 day temperature and precipitation outlook. We have one weather advisory in effect now, the winter weather advisory for blowing snow, and that will be in effect until 10 p.m. on Friday, including Point Hope, Point Lay, and Wainwright. We have brisk east-northeast winds gusting 30-40 miles an hour, creating near ground blizzard conditions. Visibilities have been at times half to a quarter of a mile, and we expect those winds to continue there along the northwest coast overnight and through a good portion of Friday. We can see Point Lay, the blowing snow 7 above, winds out of the east-northeast have been gusting around 35 miles an hour through the early afternoon. Good News Bay further south there is experiencing breezy conditions and increasing cloud cover in advance of that Bering low and frontal system that'll be working onshore during the day on Friday. In fact, there have been wind gusts as high as 60 miles an hour reported this afternoon at Cape Newingham. And so it's a breezy system that's going to cause some turbulence there for aviation interest as well in the southwest. So as of this Thursday afternoon, April 14th, we do have a moderately strong geomagnetic storm in progress. The KP index has gotten up as high as 5.6, and it could persist into this evening. Whether or not that happens, we'll have to wait and see. But nevertheless, if you have clear skies, you may want to look for the possibility of some enhanced aurora. We can see on the right side of the screen, the enhanced aurora, at least during our daylight hours, has been over the North Atlantic, southern Greenland, back through northern Europe. So once the Earth rotates for our nighttime beneath that, if it's still going, we may be able to see something here later this evening, especially around after 11 p.m., certainly local midnight. And looking at the satellite imagery, we continue to have that low pressure out there in the Bering, and you can see the curl in the clouds there just encompassing the area around Unalaska, St. Paul, Sandpoint. We have the occluded front arcing ahead of that. That'll work its way across the Alaska Peninsula on up into the southwest coast later tonight and through Friday morning. With it, it's going to bring precipitation, rain, some snow in the higher elevations, and locally windy conditions as well. So there's the low down near 975 millibars as of this afternoon, and it will continue to deepen just a little bit, maybe close to 970 overnight into early Friday morning. The winds will continue along the west coast with some blowing snow, especially there along the northwest coast. And that precipitation that works its way northeastward along the front could initially be in the form of some snow before a little warmer air comes in, and then it mixes with or changes to rain. And we'll see on Friday the low beginning to wind down as the front works its way into the southwest interior up through the lower Kuskokwim and Yukon basins. And by Saturday, we do anticipate that low to weaken a bit, and there'll be a potential for another low to work its way up through the lower Bering here later on in the weekend. Otherwise, colder temperatures are expected with high pressure in place across the far north. We expect lows below zero, North Slope, Arctic Coast, Arctic Village 7 below, but near or above freezing there along the southwest coast and through the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutians. Friday afternoon highs could get back up above 40 areas of the southwest interior, especially just west of the Alaska Range, as well as around 40-ish there. Kenai on up toward Talkeetna and Anchorage, and then in the 40s to near 50 degrees, maybe 51 there at Craig. And then for Saturday morning, a little more in the way of widespread below zero readings in the north and northeast portions of the state, the east central areas, Yukon Flats. And then temperatures as we go into Saturday afternoon will still be back up in the lower, maybe a few mid-40s there across the southwest and up into the Matsu Valley, especially the west side of the Kenai, and then again out across the especially middle and southern panhandle. And looking at the temperature outlook for April 20th through the 24th, there's a potential for a little cooler temperatures across the north through the central and southeast interiors down into the panhandle, with a little above normal temperatures remaining in the southwest, especially the lower Yukon and Kuskokwim deltas out through the Alaska Peninsula. And precipitation may average a little above normal south central areas into the panhandle, but generally average a bit on the drier side through the central interior from the eastern Brooks Range back through the southwest surrounding Norton Sound.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's now time for your aviation weather. If you are thinking about a flight here Friday into Saturday, the main weather feature will be a low pressure out over the Bering Sea, with an occluded front working its way up into the southwest interior coast, as well as through Kodiak Island. This feature will have some turbulent winds around it, as well as areas of rain, snow up in the higher elevations and mountains, and some mixed precipitation. Otherwise, VFR conditions will be rather widespread across the far northern parts of the state, centered on the north slope, areas of the Brooks Range, as well as the north central Gulf Coast in through the Panhandle. By Friday afternoon, there could be a smidgen of some IFR conditions around Tanita Pass on up toward Windy Pass as that moisture lifts northward. Also a band of IFR conditions along and ahead of this occluded front, including the lower portion of Cook Inlet back into the lower Yukon Basin, and then areas throughout the Bering that include St. Lawrence, St. Paul, St. Matthew, as well as Nunavik Islands. Saturday morning, we still anticipate IFR conditions to hold there around Kodiak Island, as well as the lower Kuskokwim Delta, and back through Nunavik Island, St. Lawrence, St. Paul, and St. Matthew. And Saturday afternoon, still IFR conditions hold in similar areas there, including Kodiak Island and the lower Kuskokwim Delta. Interior, though, central along the Yukon River on up through the Brooks Range, North Slope should see VFR conditions, as well as most of the Panhandle. Well, pass conditions on Friday, Anaktuvik as well as Adigan Pass will see VFR conditions. Further south and west, becoming MVFR with IFR conditions just south of Lake Clark. And then as we go up along the northwest side of the Alaska Range, Rainy Pass, VFR becoming MVFR. Windy Pass, that little bit of moisture creeping northward could cause IFR conditions there as we get through late morning and into the afternoon. Isabel Pass, look for MVFR conditions on Friday. Further east, Mentasta VFR becoming MVFR with generally MVFR conditions there along and north of the north entrance. Tanita Pass tapping into some moisture, you could see IFR conditions developing there on Friday, whereas Portage Pass is looking like it may be able to hold on to VFR conditions, though you could encounter IFR conditions, especially along the north side of Prince William Sound, leading up toward Tanita Pass as the day unfolds. There in the Panhandle, another day of VFR conditions, especially there in north end at Chilkoot and White. And looking at the freezing levels, the surface freezing line in the morning will run along the outer Panhandle coast, northern Gulf, and then across the southwest. YK deltas back into the central Bering. We could see a bump in the freezing levels aloft 2 to maybe near 3,000 feet west central areas, including Norton Sound, as well as southwest corner there of the Panhandle down through Haida Gwaii. Best chance for any considerable moderate icing will be along the frontal band there, especially Kodiak Island areas of the North Pacific side of the peninsula, 7 to 14,000 feet, and then a broad area between 4 and 11,000 feet, just in the vicinity of that low pressure across the central and northwestern Bering Sea. Strongest winds aloft at 30,000 feet. We have a band of 75 to 90 knot winds from Kodiak Island through the southwest mainland back up towards St. Lawrence. But the most impressive feature, 185 knot jet core just south of the central Aleutians, Bringing it down to 9,000 feet, we have a well-defined low-pressure circulation there in the central bearing, with winds ahead of it southeasterly across the southwest mainland, 45 to 50 knots, and then on the back circulating side, northwest winds of upwards of 50 to near 60 knots through and just north of the central Aleutians. This is where we would anticipate to have the greatest threat for some severe turbulence areas. They are within the north of the low, near the north side of Nunavik Island, back just west-southwest of St. Lawrence, and then north of the central Aleutians, where winds out of the northwest could be as high as 65 knots at 3,000 feet, and then a pocket there near Lake Iliamna, 50 knots from the east-southeast could cause areas of severe turbulence, as indicated here in red. Also, they're back toward the lower Yukon Delta, extending out into the Bering between Nunavik Island and St. Lawrence, and just east of St. Matthew, a broad area of surface to 3,000 foot considerable moderate turbulence there through the Aleutian chain and through the Alaska Peninsula, with areas of severe turbulence possible north of the central Aleutians. Coming up next will be our first River Watch of the season, giving you our weekly updates every Thursday by our service hydrologist, Selena. That's coming up next.
Hey, howdy, stargazers. Trace Dominguez here. Our solar system is more or less like a spinning pancake. The sun is in the middle, and the planets and celestial bodies all are along a flat plane or a disk. We can see this in the sky as the ecliptic, an imaginary line around the planet stretching from Pisces in the spring equinox to Virgo in the autumnal equinox. This astronomical pathway is where a lot of exciting stuff happens in the sky, and it's easy to see right now. Hit the skies around 5:30 a.m. and look for planets. Venus, Mars, and Saturn are visible. About an hour later, Jupiter will join the party. Draw a line through them and you'll have found the solar system's orbital plane. If you know where the ecliptic is, you can predict where the sun, planets, and moon will be on any given day. Knowing the ecliptic will help you predict where things will be in the sky while you keep looking up.
My name is Selena Van Breukelen. I'm a hydrologist at the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center. Today, I'm going to be giving you your 2022 Alaska Breakup Outlook. Here, we're going to be talking about the flood threat due to ice jam and snowmelt for the communities on the major interior rivers. This includes the Yukon, the Kuskokwim, the Buckland, the Noatak, the Koyukuk. A lot of the communities which are along rivers which have developed a stable ice cover this winter. So we're going to be examining what we're thinking as far as melt and as far as the flood threat for this spring. There are three things that we consider when we give the forecast for ice jam flooding. The first is the ice thickness and the strength. Basically a measure of, how cold has it been this winter? The colder the weather, the more ice is going to grow, and the greater thickness of ice is going to increase the strength. Another part of ice thickness that we examine is any sort of midwinter breakups, because these are going to cause there to be zones of thicker than normal ice. The second thing that we examine is the snowpack, so the amount of water that is in the watershed and available for melt. And the third thing are the spring weather patterns, specifically the late April and early May temperatures, because they control the snowmelt rate and the thermal condition and integrity of the ice. And these two factors, the melt of the snow and the thermal degradation of the ice, those two interact to cause ice jam flooding. I'll talk a little bit more about how that works a little bit later. One of the key things that we're looking at is the amount of snow that's in Alaska right now. We can see this is the percent of median snowpack map, which is created by the USDA. The National Resources Conservation Service takes monthly snow measurements throughout the state. And here we can see that for the state of Alaska, we are running at roughly 150 to 200% of median for the records that we have. So this is a well above average or well above normal snowpack that we're experiencing this year. In addition to the robust American snowpack, in the Yukon territories, they also have several sites which are recording period record maximums. So the most snow that they've seen in some of their locations. So between the snowpack in the Yukon Territory, as well as the state of Alaska, we're looking at a very robust snowpack this year. This is the village flood potential. This map is created based on how susceptible a community is to flooding. Is a community, built a little bit lower and a little bit closer to the river and has flooded more often in the past? Is a key factor in what we're anticipating. The other key factor is the amount of snow that's in the watershed, both the local watershed and the watershed that's upstream. So a community we'd like to highlight is Circle. There is a lot of water in the Yukon territories, as well as the upper American Yukon, and the village of Circle is fairly susceptible to flooding. In addition to Circle, we'd like to highlight the communities on the Yukon Delta, and that is just because there is so much snow in the watershed, and that's going to be the exit point for all that snow. So we're keeping an eye on them. In addition to the communities on the Yukon, there are communities on the middle and the lower Kuskokwim. This is because the Yukon has a normal to above normal snowpack, and also some of those communities are built a little bit closer to the river. This is just a first estimate of what we think the flood potential is for the suite of communities. It's subject to change. Here is the snowmelt and runoff graphic for the state of Alaska. This is based heavily on the snowpack estimates. So the area of red highlight is above average chances for snowmelt flooding, just based on the amount of snow that we have. We're thinking there's below average chances of flooding on the North Slope and the southern southwestern going into the Aleutian chain. Looking at the ice thickness, we're thinking ice thickness is fairly close to normal. We have heard about a midwinter breakup around the Aniak area, so that's going to be a location that we're going to look at closely. We're also going to be talking to communities over the coming weeks, trying to understand if there's anything locally that's happening close to their village, which we should be looking at from a flood potential perspective. A quick graphic on how the forces between the snowmelt and the ice thickness interact. What this is showing is that if we have a quick warm-up, that we're going to have all this melting snow pushing on a fairly intact ice sheet, and that's going to enhance our chances of flooding. Or if we have a thermal breakup, it's going to be that we have a nice, long, slow melt, and that's going to give the ice that's in the channel the chance to degrade before we have the largest snow melt push. So when that snow pushes on that ice, it's already weakened and it can offer little resistance and little flood potential. As far as breakup dates, we've had a pretty cold April statewide. So we're expecting the timing of the breakup statewide to be a few days later than normal. Specifically for the vast majority of the interior, we're expecting it to be 2 to 5 days late. And then for Southwest Alaska, we're expecting it to be 1 to 3 days late. On the North Slope, it's still a little bit early to tell, but we're thinking that the breakup dates would be about average. Comparing this year to prior events, we've had 5 years over the past 15 that have had similar ice and snow conditions. 2 of them being 2009 and 2013, both of which had major ice jam flooding. But there's also the counterexample of 2012, which had a robust snowpack, but no major flooding. And the key and significant difference between a 2013 and a 2012, both having high snowpack, is the quickness at which we're going to warm up. So 2013, we had a really cold April and May, and then it snapped warm, not giving that ice in the channel a chance to degrade, and that caused some major flooding. 2012 had a perfect long spring where we slowly got warmer, and that allowed the snowpack to melt slowly and to allow the ice to degrade. So a key factor is not just snow, but the pace at which we warm up. Just looking from the table view of what we're expecting as far as the probability of snowmelt and ice jam flooding, we're thinking the probability of snowmelt flooding is pretty much above average throughout the state, with the exception of the North Slope rivers. And based on the colder temperatures and the probability that we might be snapping warm, we're thinking the probability of ice jam flooding is above average for most of the state. So we're trending towards a more dynamic breakup this year. Watches, warnings, and advisories for the Weather Service. A flood warning means that there's hazardous flooding is imminent or happening. A flood watch means the conditions are favorable for that hazard. Or a flood advisory is there is flooding, but it's more of a significant inconvenience versus a larger event. This is just our first look. We're going to be updating the Alaska breakup map, and the URL is there. We also really would love your observations and would love to work with the local communities. So please get in touch. We have our website as well as our email address. Thank you.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and looking at the sea ice edge. Well, of note, this extent of ice we've had all the way down to St. Paul, it's been about a decade. It was the winter of 2012, 2013 that we've seen the extent of Bering Sea ice continue to linger. Nevertheless, we are seeing some areas, though, beginning to at least melt off, as well as with some of the easterly flow opening up some polynyas there along at least the southwest coast there, lower Yukon Delta, as on up through areas of Norton Sound, around especially north and northwest side of St. Lawrence Island, and then as we get up along the northwest coast, also some polynyas opening up there just west of Point Lay, as there have been some rather brisk winds that'll continue not just from today but into the day on Friday. And to start out for the southeast panhandle on Friday, we anticipate winds to be rather light. The inner channels variable 5 to 10 knots, waves a foot or two. Outer coast, look for winds out of the west-northwest, 10 to 15 knots. There could be a marine layer that begins to move inland there from the outer coast Friday afternoon into Friday night. And then on Saturday, we expect the inner channels to have light variable winds, 5 to 10 knots, maybe a little more northerly there in the Lynn Canal. The outer coast also rather light and variable, 5 to 10 knots, waves at best maybe 3 to 5 feet. Across the northwest Gulf, strongest winds will be on the north side of Kodiak Island, the entrance of Cook Inlet, easterly winds upwards to 35 knots. There, waves maybe 10 to as high as 15 feet. Otherwise, the Prince William Sound, southeast winds 10 knots, waves just a couple of feet. And on Saturday, winds will turn northeasterly in Prince William Sound, still 10 knots, a couple foot waves, and look for east winds off the Kenai around 25 to 30 knots. Easterly winds at the entrance of Cook Inlet at 35 knots, waves 12 feet. Of course, lighter as we get up north through the north of Kenai there. Across the Kodiak Island on Friday, winds will be southeast 25 to 30 knots, and look for them to turn more southwesterly as you get down along the length of the peninsula at 30 knots. Waves on the North Pacific side 10 to 14 feet. 5 feet around Bristol Bay, 11 feet there north of Cold Bay. And for Saturday, winds will continue out of the east-southeast around Kodiak Island at about 25 knots. Look for south-southwest winds as you go down along the southern portion there of the Alaska Peninsula. Waves running around 11 feet either side the Bering or the North Pacific. Across the Aleutian chain, winds will generally be southwesterly there in the eastern Aleutians, 30 to 35 knots, picking up to 35 to 40 knot westerly gales, especially west of Nikolsky on over through Adak and to almost Kiska. And then on Saturday, those winds will come down a bit, generally a westerly wind across much of the central and Aleutian chain at 30 to 35 knots. And across the southwest coast, we are going to see an area of low pressure just north of St. Paul near St. Matthew. You can see the counterclockwise circulation. Winds upwards to 35 knot east to southeast gales will help to pull that ice a little bit more toward the west and a little northward. Easterly winds out of Norton Sound at around 30 to 35 knots. And on Saturday, look for those winds around 20 knots from the southwest in the vicinity of St. Paul and George, but turning around to the east off of the southwest lower Kuskokwim area, 30 knots from the east all the way up through Norton Sound, and then along the Arctic coast. Throughout the region, a broad area of 30 to 35 knot easterly winds, so that could cause Polynius to open up a little further there along areas of the northwest coast between Cape Lisburn and Utqiagvik, as well as perhaps down there south of Point Hope. And for Saturday, winds will come down a little bit, 20 to 25 knots there across the Arctic, northwest and northern Arctic coast, and upwards to 30 knots out of the east there as we pass through the lowest portion of the Chukchi Sea out of Kotzebue Sound down through the Bering Strait onto the north side of St. Lawrence. So tonight into early Friday, pretty strong low out there and through the Bering, just north of the Pribilof Islands, arcing ahead, and a occluded front that'll work its way into the southwest coastal interior on up through the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island on Friday, and then continue to further weaken. Not as windy of a system here by the time we get into Saturday. So thank you for watching our show, and be sure to join us again tomorrow evening.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.